Are you ready for hurricane season? It's upon us, if you couldn't tell already from all that heat and humidity. Today we update you on this year's outlook for tropical storms and tackle some of the myths about hurricanes on the Space Coast. My guest today is Kimberly Prosser, Director of Emergency Operations for Brevard County. She coordinates local disaster planning from the Operations Center in Rockledge, and she makes the call on whether to evacuate. Also coming up in the program, Florida Today's own tips on how to weather the season, including what to do with pets during a storm. As always, we've got the news you can use. First, let's hear from Brevard Emergency Ops Director, Kimberly Prosser. Kimberly, what is the outlook for hurricanes this year?
Well, according to Dr. William Gray from Colorado State, his prediction is 19 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 of them major. However, of course, it doesn't really matter how many storms there are predicted for a season because it only takes one to make it a bad season.
We hear about these projections every year, and if we don't have one make landfall, does that mean that the projections are way off?
Actually, not at all, because last year it was predicted to be a below average season. It was about an average season. The storms still occur. Whether or not they make landfall on the United States is not really calculated in the number of storms.
What is the best place if somebody is new to all of this? A storm is approaching, looks like it might make landfall. Where should they be paying attention? Where should they be getting information?
They should be getting information from the Emergency Management Office, from the local media. They can go to our website, embrevard.com. We have hurricane survival guides that are available at the libraries and the county commission offices and at the EOC. And also, actually, if you look in the front of the AT&T phone book, there's a variety of emergency information there. Oh,
good. Well, so in other words, if the power's still on, just stay plugged in and tuned in and pay attention because there'll be lots of news and information coming out about
absolutely
what to do. What about afterwards? What about when the power is out? How can I find out what's going on? How can I get information?
Well, actually, one of the things that we recommend for people is you want to make sure that your cell phone still has power, and if you have an automotive charger, you can plug your cell phone into your car and still have that, and you can use that to get information electronically. But of course, certainly pay attention to whatever other media that you have available, whether that's electrical or, a newspaper.
Does the EOC do text alerts? Like, can somebody sign up to get text on storms?
We do. We actually do Facebook and Twitter and text messaging.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about evacuations. That's always the biggest hassle, potentially, or scariest thing to do if you're somebody who has to be evacuated. Who should go and under what circumstances?
If there is an Atlantic approaching hurricane, we evacuate the barrier islands. So if you are across a causeway, you should plan to go to the mainland, because not only for the actual winds of a hurricane, but it's also the storm surge. And we want to make sure that people are safe on the mainland where they can get help if needed.
So this is for the hurricanes coming from the east to Florida, not from, sometimes cross from the Gulf the other way.
That's correct.
And talk about storm surge a little bit. Why is that such a concern?
Well, storm surge is the methodical rise of water that's associated with a hurricane or tropical storm, and it can be several feet in height, or any amount that it comes inland, can affect roadways, it can affect causeway approaches.
You said a minute ago, just go to the mainland. So you don't have to go to Orlando or Georgia or...
No.
Where do I go? What would be an ideal place to go?
Well, we have several shelters. We have a dozen shelters on the mainland. And we have both general population shelters, we have pet-friendly shelters, we have special needs shelters, and also, there are hotel rooms, you have friends, family, relatives that you can stay with on the mainland. You don't have to go as far inland as Orlando.
So the main thing is just get out of the way of the storm surge, get to some place where you're away from that.
And in a sturdy facility.
And you should be able to survive the winds okay on the mainland here in Brevard County. Now, are there areas on the mainland that get evacuated ever?
Well, certainly anything that's a manufactured or mobile home, we would recommend that you evacuate that. Or if you have a low-lying area that's, prone to flooding, those are the areas that we would also recommend, as well as some areas right along, US 1 and so forth, where there is possibility of storm surge from the river.
One of the things I think we wrote about, and it's been years now, so please update me on this, if you are a person with special needs or you're disabled or something like that, if there's somebody who relies on buses for transportation, the buses don't run, do they? You have to sign up for some kind of special evacuation service?
If you have special needs, which is a special medical need, or actually if you just need transportation to a shelter, you can sign up for those on our website or through many healthcare facilities and durable medical equipment companies. They have the forms. You can register. You'll be assigned to a specific special needs shelter, and Space Coast Area Transit will come and pick you up and take you to that location.
But the key is you have to sign up ahead of time.
Absolutely.
Is that correct? Okay, so don't call,
the day of the storm.
when the power goes out and you're afraid and
right.
Ask for somebody to come.
Go ahead and go to our website now and sign up.
We'll have more of that interview in just a moment. Now, here's a checklist of what you'll need in case you have to evacuate to a shelter.
A shelter should be your last option if you cannot evacuate, stay at home, or with a friend or relative. When television or radio make the announcement, get to the shelter as soon as possible. Space may be limited. Be prepared to stay with strangers in close quarters for an indefinite amount of time. Shelters are fairly barren, so bring any comforts that you need. Here's a checklist to get you ready for a shelter. Identification, photocopies of any valuable papers, toiletries, medication, a flashlight, a portable radio or television, a pillow, blanket, cot or sleeping bag, games, playing cards, reading materials, and enough food, water, and baby supplies to last 24 hours. Guns and alcohol are strictly prohibited in shelters. Also, most shelters do not allow pets, so be sure to find out in advance if your shelter is pet-friendly.
That's good information. Now, more hurricane talk with Brevard Emergency Operations Director Kimberly Prosser. Let's talk about myths and beliefs around hurricanes. What are some of the myths that you work hard to try to address?
Well, I'm sure you've heard the myth about Brevard County not getting hurricanes. You hear that. We hear that all the time in the public. People say, oh, well, that's why Kennedy Space Center was located here, because Brevard County doesn't get hurricanes. That's not true in any form or fashion. Kennedy Space Center or Merritt Island was chosen for that location because it's close to the equator, because most launch trajectories are west to east, and there's a large ocean nearby where they could retrieve usable parts. Has nothing to do with the fact of whether or not hurricanes come here.
What are some of the other myths that you deal with?
Well, there's a misconception or myth out there that you can tape your windows to protect them during hurricane. Now, that was a popular, antiquated type of device back in the 1970s, but we're hoping that people still don't believe that one. Unfortunately, we did see last year on the Today Show that they gave that out as a recommendation.
What?
So we want to make sure that no one still believes that.
You mean as in put an X of tape across your windows and somehow that'll keep what? From shattering or something? Or?
That's the idea. However, what it may do is hold some of the smaller pieces of glass together, so you have larger shards of glass, which make it more likely for you to get cut.
Oh, I see.
So we would really recommend, hurricane shutters or
plywood.
Plywood would even be better, absolutely.
What worries you most about storms at this point? In your role as emergency operations manager, you look at all the various variables and things that could go wrong or right. What worries you the most?
I would say the thing that worries me the most is hurricane amnesia. We haven't been hit. We haven't been hit by a hurricane in a long time. In fact, the last time we had hurricane force sustained winds in this county was 1979 with Hurricane David.
What happened then?
Well, that storm actually paralleled the coast, and it traveled north along the coast. So we did have damage then, but we have not had the full brunt of a hurricane. And I don't think people remember even from 2004 what they experienced then.
Well, geez, if it went up the coast like that, it could have been like Hurricane Sandy was, that we didn't think was as bad as a tropical storm as we could have gotten. Certainly, it was well offshore, but we still got plenty of beach erosion and,
Absolutely.
and damage from Sandy.
We had $25 million worth of beach erosion from Sandy.
What about after a storm? I mean, are there things that you think are the biggest potential problems or difficult things for you to manage as emergency operations director?
Well, you know, one of the things that we are concerned with is access back to the beaches after the storm. You know, we want to make sure that those areas are safe before people are let back into the area. So public safety goes out and checks that to make sure that there's not, you know, a dangerous situation.
What are some of the check-offs to making that decision? I mean, there's have to be a certain amount of debris out of the road,
right, you want to make sure
on.
there's no power lines down in the roadway, certainly, and debris and maybe roads that are washed out, those types of things.
Emergency personnel, does that matter? I mean, do we have to wait for there to be enough police or fire personnel back on the barrier island before we can go over there? Is that part of it?
That's a good point. You know, not everyone realizes that the law enforcement and the fire rescue personnel are not staying on the barrier islands and on the beach side during a storm. They've evacuated to the mainland. So if you're actually on a barrier island and you need assistance, they're not going to be able to get to you. And that's one of the main reasons that we do the barrier island evacuations.
The wind speeds that matter in terms of getting over the bridge, is that part of it with the trucks?
Absolutely. 40 miles an hour, it's too dangerous for a high-profile vehicle to travel over the causeways.
What is the cone of uncertainty?
The cone of uncertainty is what the National Hurricane Center puts out. When they put out a storm map, they show you the position of the storm and where it might go. And that's the cone of uncertainty that it shows. And many people think that if your location doesn't show up in that cone, that you don't have to worry. Well, that's not quite true. First of all, the cone is correct only 67% of the time. So that's 2/3. Secondly, that cone shows the probable center of the storm. And third, a storm can be hundreds of miles wide. So that cone is not going to contain the entire size of a tropical cyclone.
Okay. What are some of the most must-have emergency supplies that people need to be thinking about right now, about having on hand?
At minimum, a 3-day supply of water, of non-perishable food, and don't just think about for yourself, think about for your family. If you have babies, they'll need specific supplies. If you have pets, their supplies, and your prescriptions. You want to make sure you have all that.
Prescriptions. What do you like to have on hand?
Well, I actually just read recently that the most popular hurricane food supply is blueberry Pop-Tarts. That wouldn't be my favorite, but I can see how it would be up there on the list.
I think I have a teenage son who would very much like to have some blueberry Pop-Tarts on hand. Not only do you not have to cook them, but you have all that healthy fruit
Absolutely.
in the Pop-Tart that sustains you throughout that hot, sweaty day. What else? Is there anything that, you know, for repair, tarps on hand, plywood, that kind of stuff?
That's a good idea to have, absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what my number one thing is I have to have is a gas grill with a full canister so I can cook and go. And I like to have an old camp coffee percolator that I can put right on the grill, because if you can get that cup of coffee in the morning, get a little caffeine going, everyone's much safer.
Absolutely, the caffeine is critical.
One of the things that's changed a little bit over the years, based on experience here and also during Hurricane Katrina, is FEMA. Talk a little bit about what can we expect FEMA to do or not do after a hurricane? Well,
you have to keep in mind that FEMA is only going to step in after a request from the governor. And in that case, the FEMA has to make a decision of whether or not they believe that the damage is so extensive that the county and the state would not be able to meet the needs of the persons in that area. And even if there is a disaster declaration by FEMA, there are still two different types of assistance. There's the public assistance, which is for public infrastructure,
okay.
And then there's individual assistance, which is for the residents who are impacted. So you can't count on those things.
What do they do? Last time, FEMA was bringing in ice, and that was kind of a snafu because people stood in line for a long time for ice that melted, or
right.
Sometimes it was around, but people needed ice the next day. Do they still deliver ice?
FEMA does not deliver ice anymore, and neither does the state of Florida.
So don't count on
don't count
ice.
on that.
Probably not a good time of year to be stocking up on a freezer full of meat to have, okay, you know, because there will not be ice to keep your stuff in your freezer cold. What about other types of aid? Do they distribute cash aid or
it's all dependent on the
roof?
storm and the situation. So You know, those are things that you should not count on. You should go ahead and make your own preparations.
So what happens if you suffer damage? We'll hear more from Kimberly Prosser in just a moment, right after this report by our news partners at USA Today on who to call and what to do after a storm.
No power after severe storms, a tree on and sometimes in your house maybe. Will your insurance cover this? 2 Wants to Know answered many of your questions when you called today. Here are the top 3. Question 1, is the food in my fridge covered during a power outage? And the answer is kind of depends. If it's just a general power outage in your neighborhood, you're not going to get a dime to restock your fridge and your freezer. But if a tree knocks down a power line to your house and your policy covers food spoilage, then yes, you would get money for replacement of the food. Make sure you take pictures to show your insurance company the contents of your refrigerator, and most of us have a deductible. Here's number 2. Will my homeowner's insurance cover damage to cars on my property? And the short answer is no. If your car is in the garage, tree falls down on the garage, makes the garage hit the car, your homeowner's insurance doesn't pay. Why? Because your car is supposed to be covered by your car insurance. Here's the rub with all that. Most of us have liability coverage because we have to have that by law. But most of us don't have extra coverage that you would need called other than collision coverage, and that other than collision coverage is what pays you if that tree falls on the garage and then falls on your car. All right, now to question number 3. Will my insurance cover the cost of tree removal after a severe storm? Most policies cover the cost of tree removal after a storm, but 2 Wants to Know found some insurance companies require a separate tree removal policy. Some policies are not covering repairs to property like fences, so you really do need to call your agent and find out. And if a tree just happens to fall on your yard or in your yard but doesn't hit anything, doesn't damage anything, 99% of homeowners' policies do not cover the cost of the cleanup. You can buy an extra endorsement policy, though, for just $50 a year. And I got to tell you, some of that would be well worth it because it's going to cost you probably more than $50 to get someone to come out there, chop up the tree, and haul it off. After any storm, it is best to inspect your home inside and out to see if there's any kind of damage, and always document what you see with pictures.
Insurance issues are always popular this time of year. Send your comments or questions on that to letters@floridatoday.com. Now, more good insight on hurricanes and other disasters from Kimberly Prosser, Brevard County Director of Emergency Management. We talked a little bit earlier about security. What are some of the mechanisms and agencies that are part of the emergency plan for security and police and safety?
Well, in Brevard County, we work very closely, not just with all the county agencies, but all the municipalities. We also have representatives from Fish and Wildlife, FHP, from Kennedy Space Center, from Patrick Air Force Base, from a variety of nonprofits. Those are all the people that get together in the room in the Emergency Operations Center to work together for public safety and for response.
What if you see a stoplight that is out because the power is out? What do you do?
Treat it as a four-way stop.
Thank you. Yeah, you don't just go blowing through there and wait for other people to stop. We've talked a lot about hurricanes in this program, but the Emergency Operations Center and you do a lot more than that. What other kinds of disasters or events do you prepare for?
Well, we prepare for tsunamis and brush fires and tornadoes and rail incidents and nuclear power plant incidents, you name it. If it's an emergency, whether it's natural or human caused, it's something that we want to be prepared for and have a plan for.
Nuclear accident, what kind of nuclear accident might we have here?
Well, if something were to go wrong at the St. Lucie nuclear power plant, Brevard County is designated as a host county. So people from that county who are evacuated, some of them would come here.
Talk about tsunamis. How do you prepare for a tsunami?
Well, you just want to have a plan so that you know who needs to be evacuated and from what locations, where you'll put those people, and how will you get the word to the people that they need to get out of harm's way.
I imagine it's a lot like a hurricane, only without the 24-hour news coverage ahead of time?
You'd have much less notice.
Okay.
And if we had a tsunami here, the predictions are that it would be about a 3-foot rise of water, which would, if you are east of A1A, you would want to evacuate. But if
Okay.
you're west of A1A, you should be fine.
Really, that's all the tsunami would be? How do they know that?
That's based on the continental shelf here and
Okay.
where the storm or the tsunami originated.
So when I see signs going up and down A1A that a certain town is a tsunami-ready community, that means that they have a plan in
They
place
have a
as to
plan
where
in
people
place,
should go?
absolutely, and also of how they will get the word out to the residents and the people who are out sunning on the beach.
Right. Well, what might that entail? Sirens or?
Well, it would likely entail public safety representatives going out to the beach and making loudspeaker announcements and getting people inland.
What have you had things that you've had to contend with in the past year or so? Wildfires, tornadoes, that sort of thing?
We have
Seems like it's been pretty quiet.
We have had 3 tornadoes in the past year, small ones, and we have had some brush fires. We are mostly past that season at this point now that we're in hurricane season.
Oh, that's great. We just get done with fires and now we're
There you go.
Now we're in the wet season. Tell me a little bit about your background. How did you wind up the director of emergency operations in Brevard County?
Well, I was the communications director for the county, and I worked closely with Bob Lay and the team over at Emergency Management. And he kind of took me under his wing, and so I learned a lot from him. And when he unfortunately passed, I was moved into that position.
And did you have a long interest in disasters and hurricanes or that kind of thing, or was it just primarily the communication background that fit?
Actually, 20 plus years ago, I was a 911 operator and police and fire dispatcher. So I've had that public safety interest for a long time.
You were also a Rockledge City Council member.
I was.
How long did you serve on the council there?
I was on council for almost 3 years.
And you had to give it up, or
I had
just
to give
too
that
much
up.
to do?
I had to give that up because the state attorney general decided that being emergency management director and being an elected official were not compatible.
Why not?
Well, that's her decision.
Okay, just curious. Bob Lay, who had been around for quite some time, passed away, as you mentioned. What's his legacy in Brevard County? Are there still things around that we do or know about that were kind of his doings?
Bob Lay was a legend in the emergency management community, not just in Brevard County, not just in the state of Florida, not just nationally. I mean, he was internationally known as a real leader and expert in the field of emergency management. And, you know, everyone in the business, you know, really looked up to him. And everybody learned from him.
Last time I visited Bob at work, it was in a bunker up in Rockledge. Is that still our Emergency Operations Center?
Yes, that's where we're still located.
And any prospects of building a new one? I knew that was something that he wanted to get done for some time.
That's still something that we'd like to have.
What's the status of that?
We haven't been able to move forward on that yet.
Are there any issues in terms of equipment or technology that you're trying to resolve?
Well, as far as technology, one of the things that you mentioned briefly earlier, but I wanted to remind people again, is that we do use Facebook, we do use Twitter, and we do use text messaging in order to reach people.
How would you characterize the county's relationship with the state and federal government, who are so important to any sort of disaster response?
We're in regular contact with them, both in regular meetings, but also in any type of activation with any weather situation or whatever the case may be. We'll have conference calls where we're in regular conversation with them about what's going on.
Have you detected any resistance from Tallahassee to allow the federal government to be involved in decisions? There's so much talk about that in just about every other sort of political arena now.
I haven't detected that in this situation.
Okay, okay. Other myths, anything else out there that people may believe about hurricanes that they probably need to think a little bit more sharply about?
Well, one of the things that people have a misconception about actually is that they'll run out of their prescription medications. And the state of Florida actually has a statute that provides for the ability to get refills on your prescription medications for 15 or 30 days longer than you normally would. And that's in the case of if you're under a hurricane watch or warning, or if the EOC is activated.
So you don't necessarily need to go back to your doctor, get a new prescription. You can go to your normal pharmacist and get an extension of your...
That's right.
That's really good to know, because I think that's something a lot of people don't know.
And that's another thing, though, that you don't want to wait for the last minute for. Just like you don't want to wait for the last minute to buy plywood, to buy water, to buy your Pop-Tarts.
Your batteries.
And there you go.
There was, we were talking a little bit earlier in the program about how to get signed up for Facebook, Twitter, text messages, whatever. Where should a viewer go to get more information and get alerts that they need to get for the storm season?
You can go to our website, which is www.embrevard.com, and you can find not only links to the Facebook and the Twitter and information on text messaging, but just a plethora of information about preparedness, about the various hazards we face, and all types of information that you need to prepare yourself and protect yourself.
And the hurricane season ends when?
November 30th.
Have we ever had a storm that late?
We have. In fact, just a couple of years ago, there was one in December. So, absolutely.
Okay, we'll have to stay vigilant well into the holidays, it sounds like. Kimberly Prosser, thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's our program. From the For Today newsroom, I'm Matt Reed. Thanks for watching.